It is one of the top TV shows on FX, The Americans. You might have seen it. It's a program about spies and Cold War secrets, but it's the vetting of those secrets that is drawing attention. The show was created by former CIA officer Joe Weisberg, and it's no accident which elements of the CIA's history come up during the episodes, because the CIA itself keeps busy reading all of Weisberg's scripts beforehand to make sure that he's not giving out secrets. To discuss, I was joined earlier by RT producers Tyrell Ventura and Tabitha Wallace, and I started by asking Tabitha if this is common practice in Hollywood.
It's not incredibly uncommon. Anytime you have content that is about a government agency, the law enforcement, the Army, Navy, anything that has to do with a branch of the government, you tend to go to them to check on things like facts and just make sure you're using their seals and their things. So it's not that uncommon. In this situation, it wasn't exactly the CIA going to them and saying, make a television show. An actual real-world event inspired it, which brought a CIA agent into it. So in 2010, there was the arrest of 8 individuals who were said to allegedly be spying for Russia and living here. So it went along with the story that was going on in the show. DreamWorks decided they wanted to do it and got in touch with Mr. Weisberg, who was a former CIA spy. That's how the story came out. So everything he's doing kind of has to be vetted because he was working in the CIA.
And so that he doesn't give away trade secrets that are within the department. And that makes sense, certainly. Totally. And because you're talking about they're not writing a story about something that necessarily happened in reality in the 1940s and 50s and 60s. They're talking about something that happened just recently, you said, is in, what, 2010? Right, in 2010
that happened. So what they took was the creator's experience in the 1980s of dealing with this same thing of sort of spies, both in the United States and abroad, and made the television show set in that. So it's not uncommon, and there's nothing necessarily nefarious about talking to them. It's how much oversight is happening because of it.
So Tyrell, what about in terms of censorship? I mean, certainly there has to be some concern if you are a creative type and you're trying to create these programs that mimic reality, but at the same time, you know, you have this edge to them that is a Hollywood edge. Is there a fear in terms of censorship because if you're going to take on one of these projects, everything's going to have to be vetted?
Exactly, and there's definitely a fear of censorship in that, and like Tabitha said, normally it's just kind of, you know, simple vetting, is the insignias right, things like that. However, you drift into censorship and even self-censorship when you're dealing with it, because Hollywood loves to suck up to power. And when they are suddenly dealing with, you know, government officials and agencies, they can get kind of seduced by the officialness of the agency and how cool it is. And so a lot of times they'll say, oh, well, we were going to do this, but then the agency says, oh, that makes us uncomfortable. Oh, okay, well, whatever you need. Because they also want further access to that agency down the line. But then you get into where it gets really murky and really gross is when you get into situations like Zero Dark 30, where you have screenwriter Mark Boal saying, no, I never dealt with the CIA. And then when you watch the movie, it clearly says that that they wrote in that torture led to the capture of bin Laden, which is completely categorically false. And then when you see the memos going back and forth between Mark Boal and the CIA of them vetting his script and him saying, well, you know, put this in there, put that in there, that's where it suddenly kind of turns into that element of propaganda.
Well, I was going to ask you about that, because that's where I think a lot of folks who are watching right now would say the concern is not so much that, you know, whether or not the CIA is reading scripts. It's what is the CIA allowing to be changed, or what are they forcing to be changed in order to paint a different picture of their agency, and whether that's, again, going back to Cold War issues, or even relative to right now, because clearly, we work at RT, but the relationship between the U.S. and Russia, not the best right now. With a show like The Americans, how much does the CIA work to say, well, we can kind of shift public opinion and their view of these issues by propagandizing people?
That's the real danger, is that you know, they will get in there and say, well, you know, we don't quite like how we're being shown. We kind of want Russia shown this way, maybe adjust it now. We don't have any evidence of that right now, but you know, that's definitely a very real fear, especially when dealing with agencies like this. I mean,
but it's not like the producers are going to the Kremlin and saying, now give us your input on this as well.
No, I mean, I've never had that phone call from the Kremlin saying, Tyrell, we need you to say this right now.
No, but I'm saying with the show like The Americans, they're not going to both sides and saying,
ultimately, remember, at the end of the day, it's supposed to be artists creating content. It's supposed to just be artists saying, you know, what is going to be the best TV show I can make that'll get viewers to watch. Not what's the best TV show for the CIA or what's the best TV show for the Kremlin or whatever it may be.
Sure.
You want to just create a great show. And right now, around the country, around the world, artists, especially writers, are feeling a very interesting threat. PEN America did a recent survey of writers around the globe, asking them, and these were in democracies and places that are allegedly free, freedom of speech, things like that. And they said, they're very worried about being put under surveillance for the things they write, and they're practicing self-censorship in the things that they write for fear of being surveilled or for fear of being kind of painted as someone who's a dissident. And that's
and these are people living in democracies.
These are people living in first world country democracies, and that's a very dangerous thing.
Sure it is. But going back just a minute, Tabitha, to the issue of Zero Dark 30, because I think that's an important issue here. That when we talk about government releasing documents specifically for that movie, that was a huge issue simply because these were the same documents that the lawyers for Guantanamo Bay detainees were not allowed access to.
Correct.
But Hollywood producers were allowed access to them. And then who knows what they were actually given, if the documents were even legitimate or even real documents, for that matter.
Yeah, I think it's not as if in the situation of the Americans, there's no evidence saying that they created it from top down. With Zero Dark 30, I think it became very clear that there was some of that happening. And like you said, you're putting documents in a movie that you won't let in a legal proceeding against somebody. The CIA has tried to create successful television shows to push their message for years. In 1994, CIA director then James Woolsey tried to start a television show with a production company. They sat down, they went through everything. It was all supposed to be about unclassified files. Didn't happen. They couldn't get it together, and that was, it'll have our seal if we say yes, it won't have our seal if it said no. I don't know that they're capable of really pulling that off completely, but if Hollywood allows them to sort of, it's a lot of like, here's the carrot.
It's a soft push.
We'll give you the fancy new plane to use in your plane, but you have to not mention, call it torture in this, or it's a lot of little things. It's never somebody showing up at the office saying, you can't do this. It's, it'd be better if you did this, and maybe we can get you access.
Well, propagandizing always works better when it's a soft sell as opposed to the hard one.
And you cannot forget also Operation Mockingbird that was uncovered during the Church Report in the 1950s, which, you had the CIA taking a very real hand in directing journalism and things like that. So you're always on the lookout for things like that.
Gotta keep on the lookout for it. And you guys are on the lookout for it every day. RT producers Tabitha Wallace and Tyro Ventura. Thanks, guys, so much.
Thank you.